everyone, and I'd really like to begin by connecting people to my story. So as I've worked in research for some time, and during this time I had a workplace injury involving my eyes, and fortunately nothing happened to my eyes, because once you lose your eyes you can't replace it. And that is the reason why I believe that our health and well-being should be the biggest motivator to why we should choose to work safely. Could you, next slide please, Amy? Yep. So after this incident, I developed a passion in occupational health and safety, where I then set up my own consultancy business. So my job is really to assist business in being proactive in safety, because when no one is injured or when there are no injuries in the workplace, then your business can operate efficiently and effectively. But also to ensure that WorkSafe Authority don't come knocking on your door due to a workplace incident. But the most important thing is to ensure that employees come home safely to their loved ones. Okay, so the next slide. Yep, so in this presentation, I'll be providing a brief overview on the occupational health and safety legislation, because as a safety specialist, what I found is that some of the non-compliances that I found in the workplace are due to people's lack of understanding of the work and health and safety legal requirements. So I'll be talking to you about the legislation and how this applies to your business. Then moving forward, I'll be touch basing on the risk management process and how you can manage risk in your workplace. And then finally, I'll talk to you about the COVID-19 pandemic and provide you with strategies how you can manage risk in your workplace. And the next slide. So the fun stuff, the legislation. So the legislation that I'll be talking about today is called the Occupational Health and Safety Act 2004. And this is the main work health and safety legislation for Victoria. So if your business operates in other states, then you need to check the relevant legislation in those areas. So the OGNS Act, it provides a broad overview setting out key principles and duties and obligation for duty holders in relation to work health and safety. And then we have the regulation, which supports the Act and provides more detail on specific duties relating to specific hazardous procedures. Then we have the Code of Practice and the Compliance Code, which is more of a guidance material, and it has best practice for particular topics. It has reference to the Act and the regulation, even though it's not legally binding, but that are admissible in court as evidence. So if your business chooses not to follow the code, then you need to have a better system in place and also provide justification. Now, my tip to businesses is that if you're studying, you haven't started on work health and safety, then you may like to refer to the code as a starting point, because it's written in plain English. And the next slide. Oops. So in the legislation, it says that if you're a person conducting business undertaking, then you need to provide and maintain a working environment that is safe and free of risk to health, so far as is reasonably practicable. And I've listed here some of the main key duties, not all of them, and they are safe use and maintenance of plant, which are the machines and the equipment, safe systems of work, which are the procedures, safe use, handling, storage, or transport of plant or substances, provide employees with instruction, training, or supervision. So these are so that they can perform their jobs safely. And then we have monitor your employees' health. So for example, if your workers are exposed to high noise level at the workplace, then you need to provide them hearing tests. And then we have consult employees on matters that may directly affect their work health and safety. And also keep information and records relating to work health and safety of the employees. The next one is quite important. It says to ensure that business does not endanger other people, including visitors, the public, and other workers. And then finally, report to WorkSafe all notifiable incidents. So these incidents are the ones that cause serious injuries or fatalities in your workplace, or serious near-miss incidents that could potentially cause serious injuries or fatality in your workplace. And the next slide. So whether you're working in an office or you're mainly traveling on the road visiting clients, or you are working in a high-risk workplace like a construction site, please remember that risk is inherent in all workplaces. So sometimes people tend to only associate with risks at a construction site, for example, but this is not true. So in the next slide, you can see that even in this image, even in an office setting, you can find different types of risks. For example, poor workstation ergonomics, manual handling of boxes or equipment, or tripping over hazards like electrical cables or objects on the floor. And then in the next slide, so in the legislation, it says that how do you manage risk? It comes back to the risk management process, which begins by identifying the hazards, known risks and existing controls, and then assessing the risk to see how bad it is. And step 3 is either eliminating the risks or reducing the risk by placing controls. And then finally, reviewing the controls to make sure that you haven't introduced additional risks and that your controls are working effectively. But also reviewing the controls if another incident has occurred or more advice has become available. And now all this is done through appropriate consultation with your stakeholders. And the next slide, please, Amy. Sorry. So how do you manage risks? In safety, we use a system called hierarchy control, and it's a system for used for controlling risk. It enables the employers to fulfill their OH&S responsibilities. It's a process where you consider the controls that provides the most effective protection to the lease, and it really first instructs the employer to eliminate the risk if they can, and if they can't, then they really need to work through the hierarchy control to effectively reduce or minimize the risk. Now, I'll give you an example here. If a chemical is used in a lab to clean a surface, then as an employer, first thing you need to do is consider eliminating the use of this chemical. Now, if that's not possible, then you need to consider substituting this chemical with a less hazardous chemical. And the next step is considering engineering controls, which is isolating the person from the hazard. So for this example, you may consider using fume cupboards. Then we have admin controls, which is changing the way people work around these hazards. So for example, having procedures and trainings in place so for the safe handling of this chemical. And then finally, we have PPE, which is personal protective equipment. So for this example, you may consider wearing gloves, safety goggles, or lab coats to protect the user from this chemical. And please note that PPE is the least effective control because it relies on people to use it correctly. Now, reducing the risk may involve a single use of a control or a combination or two of controls. So for example, in this situation with this chemical, you may already found a substituted chemical, but you may still also want to implement engineering and admin controls and PPE as well. Okay, so the next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a very stressful and uncertain time for many, with many people still working from home. This could create additional risks, and with the work health and safety duties, it not only applies to the physical health, but also the mental health as well. So as an employer, you still need to reasonable practical ensure the mental health of your workers and also protect them from any psychological risks. And then the next slide, thanks Amy. So if you already have a risk management process and plan in place, then you need to include COVID into it. So as mentioned, working from home has different risks to your regular workplace, and some of the risk includes mental health risks, where workers feel less supported or isolated from their managers or supervisors or their usual support network because they're not in the same vicinity, or they feel that they're not having that clear boundary between a work and home life. Or with some parents pulling their hair struggling with work and also homeschooling, and this is pretty true last year where a lot of students has been studying from home. So as an employer, what you can do is you can make known to your workers about the mental health and other support services such as Beyond Blue and Black Dog, and also having that regular communication with them, but also, if possible, offering work flexibility. Then we have the other risk, which is poor workstation ergonomics. So when you're in your regular workplace, you have, you know, your workstation set up for you. And sometimes if you work for a big corporate company, you have a professional staff who optimize your workstation. But this is generally not the case when you're working from home. So as an employer, you can provide a workstation self-assessment for your workers to complete at home, or allow them to borrow work equipment. And if working from home is something that's going to become permanent for your business because it's working, then you may consider having a professional staff coming in to assess the workstation. Now, the other hazard they can find at home is hazards at home. So sometimes people think that just because you're working at home, there's no hazard, but this is not true. Within the workspace at home, you can still have hazards. For example, in my case, my husband's shoes, he throws his shoes everywhere, or my baby toys. So those are kind of things that you can find in types of hazard you can find in the workspace. So what you can do is you can provide a health and safety checklist so that they can complete at home. Now, this is only general advice, it's not one size fits all. So you still need to conduct a risk assessment to identify all the risks at home. And then the final slide, thank you, Amy. Well, that comes to the conclusion of my presentation. I hope if I haven't bored you enough with work health and safety and you're still intrigued with learning more about it, I have a YouTube channel and Facebook where I post educational videos, post news and tips on work health and safety. Thank you for listening, and back to you, Liz.